Hi, and welcome to Chem Safety's series of online webinars. My name is Chrissy, and I am the Consultant Coordinator here at Chem Safety. And today we will be talking about how to label chemicals you decant. If you are watching our live webinar, then there is a Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen where you can post any questions. Any unanswered questions will be added to the follow-up email you will receive that will also include a link to the recording of today's session. Lauren Lyons is presenting our webinar today. Lauren started with Chem Safety in 2018 and has a Bachelor of Science with endorsement in Environmental Science from Canterbury University. She works in all areas of our business, hazardous substances, occupational hygiene, and in our lab as an analyst. I will now hand over to today's presenter, Lauren.
Thanks, Chrissy, for that lovely introduction. I'll just share my screen and hopefully that's looking good there. So today we'll be looking at workplace requirements for labels, including situations where you may need to relabel or label a container, what the legislation says, examples of labeling, and the differences between good and bad labels. So why do I need to label my hazardous substances? The regulations say so, and that's generally where we start, but in this instance, it's also just a really good idea. So I have a scenario where I have 3 bottles of colourless liquid. One is water, so good if I'm thirsty. One is ethanol, which is a highly flammable liquid and vapour, and an eye irritant. And then the third is a potassium hydroxide solution, which is harmful if swallowed, corrosive to metals, and causes severe skin burns and serious eye damage. And of course, being corrosive to eyes and skin also means that it's going to burn any mucous membranes and the gastrointestinal tract if it's ingested. So just to start off, I'd like to start a poll and see which of these would you like to drink? So bottle A, bottle B, bottle C, or D being none. So for those watching our recorded session, I've just launched that poll, and let's see what people think. So that's leaning towards what I thought was going to happen. Most of the people saying none, which is the choice that I'd go, because while I said A, B, and C, I can't remember which was in which order. So I don't want to drink any of these because I don't know which is going to be the potassium methoxide solution. I'm just having issues getting rid of this poll on my screen, so please bear with me for one moment. There we go. Even if I wasn't to be drinking these, I still need to be aware of the hazardous properties of these substances for just general handling and if there's a spill, so what I'm going to do in these instances. In general, labels are present so people know what's inside and can take the correct precautionary measures. It's not safe to keep hazardous substances in unlabelled or incorrectly labelled containers, and never store hazardous substances in food or drink containers, as people may get confused or miss the label and then consume the contents. So what does the legislation say? There are 2 main legislations relating to labelling in New Zealand. And these are the EPA Hazardous Substances Labelling Notice. This is relevant for suppliers and manufacturers of products. Everything you receive from your manufacturer or supplier should comply with these labelling requirements that are listed in the notice. What we will be focusing on today is the Health and Safety at Work Hazardous Substance Regulations. This is for when you're dealing with substances in the workplace. And the labels under this legislation do not require the same level of detail as required in the EPA notice. And within these regulations, there is part 2, which is labelling, signage, safety data sheets and packaging. We will be mainly focusing on Regulation 2.1, which will be detailed in the coming slides. There is also Regulation 3.2, which is the broad duty of managing risks associated with your hazardous substances. Having correct labelling ensures that you are able to safely manage the risks present due to the hazardous properties of the substance. So Regulation 2.1 is workplace labelling of hazardous substance containers. The regulation states the minimum requirements for a workplace label, when you need to do this, and the general labelling requirements. So in general, containers and labels must remain legible and in a durable condition. It is your responsibility as the PCBU to ensure the labels remain in legible condition and that they are replaced if they degrade. It is also key with the degraded labels to think about why are they degrading? Is the material deteriorating the container, or is the label type fit for purpose? Just something to continuously be thinking about. It also gives the alternative provisions for labelling workplace containers. So this is rather than the full requirements in the EPA notice. And we will cover these requirements in the next slide. If the alternative provisions don't apply, then you need to follow the full labelling requirements listed in the EPA labelling notice. So when do I need to label the container? The alternate provisions are substances that you manufacture in the workplace, and this includes situations where, oh, accidentally gone backwards there, so sorry, I'll just go back here. Substances that you manufacture in the workplace, and this includes situations where you are making a dilution or preparing a solution or mixture from multiple ingredients. It is not just manufacturing as you might expect in a commercial setting. And if you are manufacturing or creating a mixture, it is part of your duty to know what you are making and what the hazardous properties of the mixture are. And if you're unable to do this yourself, then you'll need to engage a chemical professional to help with this. The other possibility is substances that you decant or transfer into containers of 40 litre capacity or less. And this could be a case of I'm transferring into a smaller container to be used at different places around my site. In both of these cases, these must not be for supply outside of the workplace. If you are supplying a substance, then you need to be producing compliant labels in regard to the EPA labelling notice. So when does Regulation 2.1 not apply? There are situations when these alternative provisions don't apply. And these include if you are putting the hazardous substance into a smaller container and use the substance so quickly afterwards that it is not practicable to label the container. However, the container must be thoroughly cleaned immediately after use so that there is no hazardous residue remaining. And the example mostly for this is that I'm putting a substance into a measuring jug, transferring this elsewhere, and then cleaning the jug immediately after I've used the product. For containers greater than 40 litres, if you're decanting a substance into a container greater than 40 litres, then the full labelling requirements as specified in the EPA labelling notice apply. And finally, hazardous waste. The label requirements are very similar to what we're going to go through next, but allow for situations where the exact classifications may not be known. And so just to reiterate that hazardous waste does still need to be labelled. So the minimum requirements that apply to the hazardous waste are an identifying, describing the nature of the hazardous waste. So this might be flammable waste. If a name has been assigned to the waste, use this. Contact details of the waste producer. So this is name, address, and business phone number. And then hazard pictogram and hazard statements based on what you know about the classifications of the waste. what information do we need on our labels? So this is for our workplace labels. So there are 3 minimum requirements as listed on the screen. This is the product or chemical name. For instance, it might be ethanol, or I might have ethanol 70% if I have a dilution product. The hazard pictogram, which will be for ethanol, it would be the flammable liquid pictogram and the exclamation mark pictogram as displayed on the screen there. The hazardous statements relating to the product, which is, in this case, highly flammable liquid and vapor and causes serious eye irritation. Now, you may see on your manufacturer's labels that they have included precautionary statements, which include response, storage, and disposal statements. These are not required for the labels you are creating. However, absolutely include these if you want to. Response statements tell you what steps to follow after exposure to the substance, such as first aid recommendations. And if there is further information that can be added to the labels to help manage any risk posed by the substance, then this should be included on the label. This is to help you comply with Regulation 3.2 that we mentioned earlier, managing risks associated with your hazardous substances. And for instance, this might be if the information is worksite specific for the substance, such as only used for process A. This is an example that WorkSafe has given, and it shows these 3 minimum requirements. So we've got mineral turpentine, which is the product name, the hazard pictograms that are associated with the product, and then the hazard statements. And in bold here, you'll see the word danger. This is known as the signal word, and it corresponds to the hazard classifications of the product. So with labels, you get the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we will detail what distinguishes the good from the bad. So we've got the good, the bad, and the ugly. So what makes a bad label? Why is it bad? Other than not having the sufficient information, other things can make a label bad. Labels in poor condition that are not legible and durable. And we need to think about, why is this label in poor condition? Is it the substance affecting the integrity of the container or the label? So on the right hand side there, we've got an example of ethanol, which is written in marker pen, and the writing has been rubbed off either by handling or dissolved by the solvent when it was being decanted and ran down the side of the container. So what we say not to use, don't use a marker pen or Vivid. It's just not going to be durable in the long time. Also, you can print a label from just your general work printer, but you need to think about how this will last with time. Labels that have been printed with a thermal label printer are likely to fade over time in presence of solvents, heat, and acid fumes. So down the bottom, we've got the example of the ethanol labels. This was just done over a day with some exposure to the fumes from the ethanol. And you can see that these degrade in a manner similar to a receipt that is left on a dashboard. It fades and disappears over time. Or if there's some spillage, you can see it's just completely turned black over the word ethanol. And then inkjet printers are also not ideal, as the ink is likely to run or bleed and make the text illegible. Creating a label doesn't need to be complicated. So these are the steps to follow in creating a good workplace label. First of all, we want to ensure the new container is fit for purpose, such as the material is compatible with the substance and we're not using the food and drink containers as we discussed earlier. Then the next step is making sure the label has the 3 minimum requirements that we discussed before. So we need our identifier, our hazard pictograms, and hazard statements, which all reflect the hazardous properties of the substance. And third, we want to make sure the label is both legible and durable. So this can be achieved in many ways. Here are just some examples. You can use a heavy-duty laser label. You can print a label from your work printer, not using the inkjet or thermal paper labels as mentioned on the last slide. But what we can do is laminate or cover the label with sellotape to enhance the durability of the label. You can also have labels printed commercially if you don't want to do that yourself, but you'll need to discuss the durability requirements with your label supplier. And these are some examples of things that you can have on hand if you are decanting or manufacturing frequently and don't want to have to create your own labels. So on the left-hand side, you can see the color-coded squirt bottles, and beneath that are the ready labeled spray bottles. These are ready labeled containers fit for purpose, and they already have all the required information printed for that chemical. We've also seen, as on the right there, dog tags or similar plastic tags that have been either etched or engraved to have all the substance information on these, and then they can be zip tied or otherwise affixed to the container. So we'll just go through a case study, but first I need to have a drink of water from my Kiwi Blue water bottle. I can confirm that it's just water. So people accidentally drinking hazardous substances. This first story is from February 2016, but there will be a couple more to follow. So a worker was doing routine chipping and painting. Feeling thirsty, he noticed 2 plastic bottles with drinking water labels on a nearby table. He took the cap off one of the bottles and took a big gulp. He immediately tasted solvent and spat out the liquid and then sought first aid treatment. And there are many stories like this. We've heard of different incidents where a pump water bottle was filled with methyl ethyl ketone. It was removed from the applicable work area and then left in an admin area. And then an admin office worker mistook this for just a standard water bottle, took a drink, and due to the zipper top of that style of water bottle, there was no odour cue to suggest that it wasn't water. For both of these cases, they were like, oops, pushed the wrong button there. There was nothing hugely that was a consequence that followed because they noticed the problem straight away. But this isn't always the case. Some incidents have far more serious consequences. A case in New Zealand back in 2012, a cleaner left a Sprite Zero bottle full of benzalkonium chloride on the bar counter. This was later put in the bar fridge by other staff members, and then it wasn't until weeks later this was unknowingly served to 2 customers, both of which ended up in hospital following the ingestion of the chemical. So I was going to ask the audience what went wrong, what you thought happened in these instances and what could be avoided. Unfortunately, I think you might know the answer already. So let's just go through what went wrong. First of all, the container was not fit for purpose. The chemicals have been decanted into the incorrect storage. Hazardous substances should never be stored in food or drink containers. I've said that before, you're probably getting sick of me saying that, but it's an absolute. Even if there are labels on top of the container, people get confused if it's in a food and drink container and might consume it. In these events, there were insufficient warning labels. There were no labels present, and so there was no indication that there was a hazardous substance inside. And thirdly, they were not stored in an appropriate location. They were either left unsecured or moved from the work area, and without the sufficient labels, they were taken by unauthorised personnel and then used. Pictograms and hazard information will be present on your safety data sheet and the manufacturer's labels on the product that you already have. But if you are wanting to get pictograms and information to make your own labels, here are some sites that can help you with this. The REACH and UNECE sites have pictograms ready to download in different picture formats and are easily downloadable for use. They're also just of a good quality. The pictograms and explanations of what they mean and hazard statements, if you also want to confirm these, can be found in many documents such as WorkSafe's Quick Guide to Labelling, and also just can be found on Wikipedia under the search of GHS hazard pictograms. So please make use of these sites, they have some great information. If the pictograms don't look the same as the ones displayed on the left here, it might be because DG for transport pictograms have been used. And this is what the DG pictograms look like. So if these are used on your current labels or safety data sheet, these are also fine to use on your labels. You might be wondering, does any of this apply to laboratories? The short answer is yes, but there are some slight differences. So the laboratory requirements for labelling come in section 18.9 and 18.10. This is in part 18 of the Health and Safety at Work Hazardous Substances Regulations. So 18.9 is the handling, packaging and storage of approved hazardous substances. 18.10 is handling, packaging and storage of unapproved hazardous substances. Approved substances will have the information required already available as the chemical has been assessed. But this isn't always the case because labs are allowed to have unapproved substances. This might be because it's something that's created in the lab or something that's imported for research purposes. If the substance is unapproved and that information isn't available on the assessment sites, then the PCBU needs to provide all the hazard information that is available. So on the screen now, you'll see a warning of the hazardous properties of the substance if it's classified as any of these classes. So it's not applying to every HAZNO class, but these main ones as listed. And then this is what needs to be on the labels, depending if it's approved or an unapproved substance. So for approved, you have the identity, the concentration, if this is applicable, and a brief warning of the hazardous properties if there is any of the hazard classifications listed on the previous slide. We have an example on the screen there for hydrofluoric acid. So we've got the identity, the concentration is 5%, and it has class 6.1C and 8.3A. So the brief warning is that it's toxic and corrosive. The main point for lab labels is that the warnings must be able to be read and understood within 10 seconds of picking up the container. For an unapproved substance, the PCBU must know the physico-chemical properties of the substance or the ingredients used in a mixture, and know the hazardous properties of similar chemicals and any possible reaction products. The labels for this kind of unapproved substance must include the identity of the substance or components of the mixture, information on the hazardous property of the substance, if this is available, and any precautions that should be taken when handling the substance. You might be thinking, what if my containers are really small? How am I going to fit this information on containers? So these are two examples that I have from just our lab. These are RI liquids that we use in the analysis of asbestos. And it is the big container there next to the vivid for scale. So the larger container is 30 ml capacity and the small one is 7.4 millilitres. So this is really tiny. A teaspoon is 5 ml. So a 7.4 ml container is absolutely minuscule. What we have done in order to combat this problem is to put a tag or fold out label on the side of the container. And all the requirements are the same. We are ensuring that this is made of a durable material. So these are not torn or degraded through standard use, but when that happens, it is easy just to stick on a new tag. My mouse has disappeared again. There we go. So a recap of the obligations. It is the manufacturer's responsibility to ensure that the substance is supplied with labelling and packaging that is compliant with the EPA labelling notice. The PCBU must ensure that this label and packaging remains legible and in a sound condition and replaces these if they do degrade. If a substance is manufactured or decanted in the workplace, and this is for containers less than 40 litres, the PCBU must ensure the labelling requirements as listed in the Health and Safety at Work Hazardous Substance Regulations. And that's it for today. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, do please feel free to post it in the Q&A section or flick us an email, and we will get on to answering that as soon as we are able. Hope you all have a nice day. And thank you again. See you later.